Hey guys, if you can think about how you found this podcast, maybe it's on Instagram or TikTok, maybe someone shared it with you. I don't run ads for the show or have sponsorships, so the only way this grows is through word of mouth. If this was valuable for you in any way, my only ask is if you could share this with someone who you think would help their investing journey or business. Thanks a lot, and let's get to the episode. Welcome back to STR Like the Best. I'm your host, Michael Chang. It's my great pleasure to welcome my friend John Bianchi to the show. John, thank you for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me, Michael. Appreciate it.
So John is one of the foremost experts on how to use data to drive investment decisions in short-term rentals. I'm super excited about this conversation. John and I met a few months ago and we immediately hit it off. We had breakfast together and he opened up his laptop and started walking through what he did. And I was like, oh, someone else that looks at the world exactly the way I do. I've got to know him and I think this would be a really interesting conversation. But before we dive into the numbers, John used to operate some Airbnbs in Chicago. So John, regale us with what was one of your most memorable guests?
Most memorable guest, one time I had so in Chicago, obviously there's gangs in Chicago and there's violence and whatnot on the south side of Chicago. All my properties were on the north side of Chicago. And it turns out, I figured this out, that sometimes the people from the south side will book Airbnbs on the north side because to hide out. That's something that will happen, which is something you have to learn how to vet and deal with when you own Airbnbs in Chicago. But anyways, I had a group of young drug dealers who actually stayed at one of my Airbnbs and just partying. And I ended up having to try and kick them out. It took me almost half a night to be able to kick them out. It was just me by myself. And there was like 12 of them. But I had a conversation with one of the guys and he was honestly super nice, but they just were not the ideal guests because they were partying and blaring music and everything. But I ended up talking to the one guy for half an hour and he told me, he's man, there's just grown men trying to kill us on the south side. And so we hide out on the north. And I'm like, all right, man, stay the night, but get out in the morning. And they did. They actually were a little bit more respectful after that, after we talked for that while. And they left in the morning and it was all fine. But that was easily the most interesting guest I've ever run up against.
Man.
Yeah.
Every time I ask this question, I never know what I'm going to get, but it's good. I'm glad it sounded like it all worked out. Another point for guests vetting. Although to be fair, they had a party, you talked to them, they stopped.
Yeah. So I actually figured out that what a great rule is to not let anybody that lives within the city stay inside your homes. And the reason being is because their friends can drive to the Airbnb. So nobody can be within driving distance to your Airbnb. They all have to fly in. That was my rule for Chicago. Yeah.
Fair enough. That's a good rule. Yeah, no, that's a really good rule to have actually actually that's the rule that we have is if it's if it's a last minute booking on the weekends and they live within close to Philly, we vet those a lot harder because the probability of them having a party is way higher, to your point.
Yep.
Why are you renting an Airbnb in the same city and then your friends can just drive and
exactly. The company Sonder, which is almost like $1 billion company now, that was their rule of thumb. You can't book it and if you live within the city. And I was like, I'm just gonna use that. And it worked extremely well. I got rid of all of my parties, all of my issues. It was super rare that it ever happened. So just a quick little tip from a fun little story.
Yeah. Before we jump into it, you stop. So what happened to those units? Those 15 units, did you COVID?
Unfortunately. Yeah, it's a combination of two things. So when COVID hit, I had half of them were rentals, half of them were management properties. And I rented out every single one of them for a year-long lease once COVID hit because absolutely no revenue was coming through in Chicago. But at the same time, I was at this breaking point where I either was going to continue to build a business or walk away. And I had somebody who just offered to buy the business. And so they offered to buy me out and it was a good deal. It allowed me to pay everybody back and whatnot. And so I took that deal. In other words, I took the easy route out. And honestly, it's one of my biggest regrets of selling off that business. The guy I sold it to completely ruined the business, ran into the ground in under a year. Wasn't able to get all the money from him. It was like getting blood from a stone, just not going to happen. And it went terrible, to be honest, which is really upsetting, but a lot of learning lessons from it. And if anyone ever is trying to sell a business, I know how to do it, but talk to a business broker and make sure that you work with a business broker to make that happen. So that's what happened to my Airbnb business. And I'm currently trying to rebuild it back up. But this time I'm trying to buy all the properties rather than rent them or manage them.
And it's a perfect segue to our conversation. And before I move the point, you are talking to an M&A banker or a former M&A banker. If you ever anyone ever needs a business brokering advice, give me a shout. I can dust off the old playbook. But no, that's great. And it's a great segue into kind of the meat of the conversation on For you, obviously, now that you're looking to restart your business by buying properties and leveraging data to do that, you are the Airbnb data guy, right? And then a lot of people kind of represent that they know data, but I've actually seen your work and folks like this guy really actually knows what he's talking about. Tell us a little bit, just a little bit of background. How did you get into data analysis? Like, how did this become your calling professionally now?
Yeah. So I will explain how I got to this point. I just want to explain where I am right now so that people understand. I am the head of data for TechFester. And TechFester is the largest short-term rental investment fund in the United States. We've bought almost 100 properties so far. And we've raised almost like 45 million to 50 million dollars so far, and we've been open for about 16 months. And it's my job to identify what's the absolute best market for us to go into, what's the best thing for us to purchase within that market, and how do we maximize revenue of that property. That's what I do during the day with TechFester. However, I also have a Airbnb data consulting company that I run in the evenings, which helps people learn my processes and be able to buy profitable properties. And I've got 4 free courses on YouTube that also teach people everything about Airbnb data. So I live and breathe Airbnb data, right? Just so like a little credibility so people understand like how obsessed I am with this stuff. But how I got to this point is, honestly, I was talking about this yesterday. The reason I'm so obsessed with the data is because of all the mistakes that I made. So the very first home that I got up and running, I didn't even know that AirDNA existed. And I just looked at the calendar and then went and got it. And I lost money on that property. Then the next time I learned that AirDNA existed and I went and got another property, but I didn't know how to navigate the data well. And I lost money on that property. And then started getting more obsessed with it and learning how to navigate this data to be able to make good decisions. And then I was able to understand Chicago extremely well, open up 4 properties within 2 months, and all of them cash flowed well, right? And then I was able to compound that and open some more. But then, that gets you so far where it's, okay, it worked out. Now let's go into another market and do it again. But then I go down to Scottsdale thinking I know everything about Airbnb data. And I get down there and I ended up opening up 2 properties that both didn't have a pool heater and both the properties didn't make money. And so I made the mistake again. So it made me even more obsessed because I made the mistake again of being like, okay, I can't miss these tiny little details because they make all the difference. And that really led me to building out a process and a system to ensure that if I were to be making a decision like this again, to actually buy a property or get a property or help somebody get a property, that I truly was vetting it all the way through and wasn't missing anything. And I was doing this for myself. Then what happened was I started to help some people, and then those people started referring people like crazy. And then I made a little course, didn't know how to sell it, threw it onto YouTube. And it all just started compounding from there. More and more people started reaching out. More and more people started talking to me. I always say that I created a consulting company without trying to. It just happened. And then I got this position with TechFester to allow myself to be wrapped around Airbnb data to continue to enhance my skills in the data scene. So that's the sort of long and short of how I got to the point of being the Airbnb data guy.
Got it. Yeah, no, that's great. And I think there are always the bumps and bruises along the way. And I think the perseverance to stay the path and become a real expert in your craft. I think that's what creates the expertise, and you've done it for yourself, and you're obviously doing it for a tech investor. So tell us a little about your process. I mean, some of these details matter, right? That pool went out. If you don't have a pool heater in Scottsdale, that hurts you. How do you think, for the listeners out there, AirDNA it's daunting, right? There's a lot of numbers going on. Walk us through, maybe in 30, 45 seconds, from a top level down, how do you go from I don't know where to start to, okay, this is a market that I could be interested in.
Okay.
I don't want you to give all your secrets out, but
Yeah,
give us a little bit, give us a part of the recipe.
I'm laughing a little bit because you said 30, 40 seconds, tell me everything. I'm like, I've got 4 courses on YouTube that are hours long. So are you asking how do you decide on a market? Because that's one
thing.
Yeah,
like just how do you go and look for a market? How do we use AirDNA to look for a market?
Okay, if you're not paying for AirDNA and you're just looking at it.
You're paying for AirDNA, rental arbitrage.
Perfect. Okay, if you're paying for AirDNA, it's a lot easier. And what you want to do is you said rental arbitrage?
Yeah, that's just for instance.
Okay, so the way that I would do it is if I were to go using AirDNA, there's a thing called top properties on AirDNA, right? Which allows you to see the best performing Airbnbs. Now, the reason I like using this is because most Airbnbs are really poorly put together. And then there's always a handful that are actually done well. And so what you can do with that top properties option as well is you can narrow it down just to the 4 bedrooms that allow 10 guests. So if there's 500 4 bedrooms, they're only going to show you 12. But if you narrow it down to the 4 bedrooms that offer 10 guests, that's only like maybe 80 of those, and then that you're seeing the top 12 of those 80. And that tends to be like the best of the best and where I want to be and where you should want to be as well. And so what you can do is you can take a look at those top properties, get an understanding of how much revenue is being made for those properties. And you can do the same thing, 11 guests and 12 guests, and it gives you a range for these 4 bedrooms. And then you have a general idea of how well a 4 bedroom will do if you do it right. And then you can go and look online to figure out what the rent would be for a 4 bedroom within that area, and then quickly do the math. So the rent's going to be $3,000, let's say $3,500, which means my total expenses are going to end up being around $65,000 a year. But I'm seeing that these properties are making $80,000 to $100,000 a year. That's enough of a profit margin for me to be able to invest in that market. Right? And then most of the time, you're going to find that it's not going to do that. Most of the time, you're going to be like, okay, my expenses are $60,000 and the properties are making $60,000. All right,
Yep.
doesn't work. Move on to the next one. Right.
Yeah. That's great. That's a great, and that's a great way to shortcut that not shortcut the process, but a great way to get to the most profitable properties in the most efficient way possible. So I'll tell you the way that I do it, and it's slightly a little different. The way that I do it is we'll look at a property. I actually will look at, I'll go a little higher level actually, because what I want to do is see where the property, which markets are the most profitable, or sorry, which markets are the most attractive, maybe not the most properties that are the most profitable. And I'll look at the supply and demand. I'll use AirDNA. I'll look at the supply and demand dynamics. I'll look at historical occupancy, how that's changed year over year. I'll look at ADR growth and then paint a picture for myself on, is there more supply and has occupancy gone up or down? Okay, it's gone up. Why? And then I look at demand and supply and says, hey, demand's grown by 50%, the supply's grown by 20%. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Then that's why occupancy is higher. And then if I look at ADR growth, it grows like 10%. Then it's okay, look, it's checked all 3 boxes. And at least I can validate to myself that this is a market that is attractive. And then you go do the work and say, okay, if you're getting positive headwinds in this market, then I'll look at individual properties and then actually kind of similar to what you're doing. And also I have a few other things that I do, but then I'll look for properties that will allow for Airbnb, and then I'll underwrite it that way. Curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I think you put it nicely. I think you might be going backwards. And the reason being is because you could check out a market to see if the supply and demand, the ADR, if it's increasing, the occupancy, all that stuff is great. But all that matters at the end of the day is, will a property cash flow here? Then if the answer is yes to that, then you would then vet to make sure that it's a market that is thriving and not dying, which is that step there. So personally, I think you should reverse it and go look at the properties first, see if there is any sort of profit margin to be made within those properties by checking the top properties and backing it up against what's on Zillow. And then be like, okay, there is. All right, now is this a good market or not? Because the reason is that you could check a market. It could look like it's a good market. It could look like it's moving in the right direction. And then you go and check, and there's just not a lot of money being made across those homes. And there's no profit margin to be made, no matter either the home prices are too high or the revenue is too low. And an instant
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, look, I think there are different approaches, and I appreciate your feedback there. And that's why I was really looking forward to this conversation. I think on the Airbnb arbitrage side, I think maybe if I was buying, I think I may look at it slightly differently, just because, it's a little more, one, you can buy wherever you want, versus arbitrage, you have to actually be able to, scalability, actionability are big factors. So I think for me, I want to cast a wider net versus being like, hey, these properties in this area actually do well. If they don't do well there, then then I'm stuck, right? Then it's okay, then these don't make sense and I need to move on to a different property. Whereas if I look at from a market perspective, if that's profitable there, then I can go and outreach within that market to find stuff that may work or not. And then I underwrite the property. And for that, for arbitrage, that from my experience has worked well. But again, I think everyone has their own different approach, but it's great to hear that's how you look at the world. Just to continue moving on. So when you're looking at these individual properties what do you think about AirDNA? Do you like the data? What kind of confidence do you, based on your experience now using it for so long, do you have in the data?
So the thing is, I use AirDNA like almost every single day, but I also use my own tool and I use another tool as well. And AirDNA.
What's your own tool? What's the Airbnb guy's secret tool there?
Yeah, I refer to them as profit maps. So I have access to raw data that allows me to essentially clean out all the data and then organize it and sort it into a really easy way to navigate all of the data for a market. So let's say that you're trying to pick apart Chicago and figure out where's the best place to invest. I have a report that I put together which allows you to very easily do that. And then I also provide this training that's free that allows you to understand my process of how to navigate a profit map to be able to find a profitable property. So the way that I like to explain this, okay, it's my tech stack. Top of the top is STR Insights. If you don't know what market to go into, use STR Insights to help you narrow down where might be a good market to go look, right? Once you have a general idea of a couple of places that you're considering, I use AirDNA to see at the top level could this market actually work? Like we were just talking about supply, demand, ADR, using the top properties to look at it from a high level. That goes, okay, that tells me that, yeah, that might actually work. And then I use profit maps to get really granular, get into the details, get into the weeds, get into the properties, and try to figure out where within the city the most money is to be made, exactly what the property needs to look like, the size of it, how to maximize revenue, and exactly what's the best thing to purchase. So it's a 3-step. I have no idea where I want to go, vetting it, and then getting into the nitty-gritty detail.
So we didn't talk about STR Insights. Why do you use STR Insights to do that first level, that very top of the funnel versus the profit maps or AirDNA?
Because the profit maps and AirDNA don't try to solve what STR Insights solves. So they do different things, right? So STR Insights is literally built to help you find the market to invest in. Okay. So it's using a lot of high-level data from every single market and then putting it in a display that allows you to see each individual market side by side.
Okay.
And then they rank it based off of the purchase price to revenue, right? Now, AirDNA, you can't see a list like that through AirDNA. You have to type in the location to figure out the data on that, right? So it's almost impossible to rank them unless you can keep all of those numbers in your head, right? And so anyways, so AirDNA is not built to do that. It's built to help you navigate the high level information of one's particular city. And then profit maps is very specific to that one city and all the data in that city. And it's built in a spreadsheet and it gets into the nitty gritty detail.
I think like you explained it really well, being able to use different data tools at different points of the process because they're all optimized for different things. So do you, personally, I do arbitrage, right? Where renter arbitrage, for folks that don't know, is a strategy for Airbnb investing where you rent an apartment and with the landlord's written permission, you re-rent the apartment on Airbnb via RVO after you furnish it, and then you make it into a nice short-term rental, and you have permission from the landlord to re-rent that. Whereas from buying, that's much more straightforward. You identify a property, you buy it, you own it, there's a mortgage on it generally, you do the improvements, and then you rent it out. And John, I know you said you did some arbitrage before in Chicago. You obviously work for a fund that they own exclusively, right? They don't do rent arbitrage. So do you see, and I'm really curious on your answer here. I'll give you a second too. Would you use data tools differently for if you were looking at arbitrage versus buying?
No, the answer is no.
Okay. So you would still use STR Insights to find a profitable arbitrage market.
Okay.
Because you can't purchase price.
Yeah, because I was thinking I use AirDNA. So AirDNA and profit maps, I use the exact same way to buy properties as I did for arbitrage. So it's the exact same. But for STR Insights, when it comes to, I've never used it for rental arbitrage. Okay. But it's made, Kenny literally built it for investors. That's his whole thing. I'm an investor and I built this for investors. So he didn't say I'm an arbitrage guy and I'm building it for arbitrage people. Yeah. So it's not built.
Yeah, no, I got you. And I was actually just curious if you thought that would be appropriate as well. Look, they're definitely different tools are optimized for different things, right? Yeah. I think a lot of it as an analyst, as investors, finding the right tool for the right job is actually it's like a huge thing, because if it's suboptimal, you're probably like doing too much work and not getting the right output. Okay, so let's continue to move on. For buying, for example, I think you brought up the point about when you were in Scottsdale, right? Like you didn't have a pool heater and it didn't make money for you. So how do you actually, how'd you come to that conclusion? I'm very curious. Like, how'd you realize that, oh shoot, I should have installed a pool heater, right? Pool heaters are like, I don't know, what, 10, 20, 10,000, not probably not that much. How'd you come to that conclusion?
The sad thing about getting an Airbnb that isn't going to work is that it takes a year to figure out that's not going to work. You gotta
Yeah.
you run it for an entire year. You do everything that you possibly think of to maximize the revenue. You get to the end of the year and you realize you didn't hit the number you thought you were going to hit. And you're like, oh, I didn't make any money. And I just worked an entire year.
It
And it's draining. And it's an
sucks.
arbitrage property, which means I had no equity in it. And I threw $20,000 plus into the property. In other words, I worked for an entire year and lost $20,000. So I'm like, okay, I did something wrong. That's step one after that year period where you realize that. And then what you have to start doing is start thinking to yourself, okay, what exactly did I do wrong? And that's where you're taking the guest feedback, and you're also that's where you start, when I started to dive even deeper than I used to into the specific properties. So first off, the guests were always complaining that there was no pool heater. That was the number one complaint. They're like, even in the summer when it's crazy hot, people don't really care. But the thing is that it's only crazy hot for 3 months, and the rest of the time it's like just hot or warm, but the pool itself doesn't heat up the way that you would want it to, where you can just easily go into it. And so the issue is that everyone was complaining about the pool heater. And then I go and start looking at all of my competition, the people I'm going up against that have the exact same bedroom, bath, in the exact same neighborhood, everything. I'm realizing that almost in all their titles or in the description, it's saying pool heater everywhere. And so the way that I think about it is, if everyone's complaining about a pool heater and they booked the home, most people who are probably smarter about this and like thoroughly checking, like, let's make sure this property has a pool heater, are going to my competition first, regardless if my property was designed better or had better photos or maybe even had more amenities. They're like, it doesn't have that number one thing, which is because we're not going to be able to use the number one amenity, which is the pool, at least not comfortably in the way that we want to. And so then therefore it's not a property we're going to rent. And so they're almost always going to choose the one that has that, even if it's a lesser property. So that was the sort of conclusion that I came up with. And it's been proven over and over again with TechFester. Every single property we buy, if it doesn't have a pool heater, very first thing we do is put a pool heater.
Put a pool heater. Okay.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was in Long Island over Mother's Day, and we forgot to turn the pool heater on the first day. And it was like, oh man, this is like really uncomfortable. And then we made sure to turn it on the second day. And you really do get to enjoy the pool way more with the pool heater. But I think the question here is, how do you know, like, how can investors sidestep your mistake?
Yep. And I'll explain how I sidestep it nowadays, right? You got to obviously we're using the data. We're getting down to the nitty gritty detail of the data, and we have individual property information on each one of these listings. So let's say I'm going into a market, I'm going to take all the data for 4 bedrooms for that specific location. And then I'm going to make sure that I'm just using good data. And then with that good data, and I can talk about good data, talk about it in every single podcast, but with the good data, I literally open up every single listing and I review everything that I can about that listing, and I make notes on every single property. I've been doing this for years now, and I literally was like yesterday, even before we hopped on this call, I'm writing out what the type of home, of what it looks like, essentially the frame of the home. So the things that I can't change about that home. So does it have 2 living rooms? Does it have 1 living room? How big is the backyard? Does it have a pool? Does it have all these things that are structure that I can't really change? And then I'm also making notes on all the amenities and features that they've added to the property. How well did they design the home? How well did they photograph it? Do they have a hot tub? Did they insert a mini putt into the backyard, depending on the market, right? So all of these things, then I'm keeping track of all of those things. And then I'm trying to keep track of stuff that is unique that I'm seeing in like the titles that are being pointed out. So as an example, it's close to this lake, or it's 1 minute drive from here, or we're close to the mountain, or we have a pool heater, or we have a golf cart for you. Because those, usually the most important things are always going to be in the title, and obviously the description as well. So the way that I get around making this mistake is by literally making notes on every single last thing about every property that is a good piece of data that I'm going through, so that I don't miss anything. So that as I'm going through, I'm not missing anything. Because if you just look at a property, you're like, oh, it's pretty pictures, it's got these different things. But once you start writing it out and start taking notes of these different things, what you'll start to realize is 2 things. One, you're going to start picking out little stuff that you probably would have easily skipped over. And then 2, you're going to start noticing what everybody has. You're going to see what starts coming up over and over again. This is a kind of a crazy example from yesterday. I was looking into a new market yesterday, which is Baldwin, Michigan. I was doing an evaluation for a client, and every single listing had a really big fire pit area. Like, when I'm talking about really big, like enough for 10 to 12 people to sit around.
Oh, wow.
It was they were all huge, like big, massive fire pits in the middle. And it was like the focal point of each of these different backyards. But the crazy thing is usually you get like a one-off person that does that, but every single one of them had these like massive fire pits. And my client bought a home and it didn't have a massive fire pit. So I'm like, hey, make sure you put down a really big fire pit, right? And it's got to be big and competitive. Super unique to that specific listing or that specific area. But I figured it out because I was writing out fire pit. And then as I'm writing fire pit, I'm like, that is a really big fire pit. I go to the next one. That's also a really big fire pit. What are the odds of that? Two really big fire pits. And then you start seeing it like 5 times and you go, okay, this is something that matters in this market, right?
So John, so on that point, as an AirDNA user myself, and then obviously you go on Airbnb as well, but it's really hard to go and get a list of all the properties in Baldwin, Michigan. But how do you get all the data? How do you get that granular level data? Do you pay for it through a service? Are you collecting the VAs, running it for yourself?
That's all me. That's my company.
Okay, great.
That's what we do. So my Airbnb data consulting business, one of its main products is being able to get you all that granular data and being able to, once again, clean it, sort it, and organize it into a format that makes it very easy to go through, which is I refer to that as a profit map. And the reason it's called a profit map because it allows you to find the profit within any market very easily. And the way it's set up, in my brain, it looks like a map because you can see all the zip codes, you can see all the bedrooms, and you can see where the most money is being made very quickly.
We got to get an example of one of these so we can actually see in real life next time. And then I think a couple of things that people really get hung up on when it comes to analysis. And I think the biggest one is paralysis.
Yes.
There's so much out there. And obviously you're really good at this, right? You see the numbers in a way that maybe other people don't. I think a lot of people, they get intimidated. Just say, hey, there's all this information. I don't know how to I don't know how to organize it. I don't know how to interpret it. I don't know how to action on it. So tell us a little bit about how someone can, and specifically for STR, short-term rental Airbnbs, like how do you avoid paralysis, or if you're in it, like how do you pull yourself out and actually do something instead of just staring at your keyboard and bang your head against the table?
So I want to start off first. You said that a lot of people don't know how to interpret it. They just don't know how to make sense of what they're looking at, things like that. I want to talk about that for just a second, then I'll hop into that because I don't have a formal data background. I just got obsessed with Airbnb data for whatever reason. I love it and I learned how to use it. I learned how to make sense of it. And I realized that there are so many people out there that want to do Airbnb and have no idea how to interpret the data to make good decisions. And so that's why I've made multiple courses for free on YouTube that teach you how to make the data simple to then be able to make decisions, right? So I'm just going to start off with that where, yes, I can explain it right now in this podcast, but there's hours of content on my YouTube channel. Just look up my name, you'll find it. And you can go through the Profit Map Masterclass is the best thing to go through. That's going to make it simplified and easy for you to be able to make actionable decisions. Once again, I built that because I talked to a lot of people who had no idea what was going on. Okay, I'll build something to help them. And that's what's out there.
We'll make sure to link your YouTube channel in the show notes here. So for folks, it's easy to find.
But
I guess maybe just if we can distill it down, just for folks that are stuck right now on where to invest. And obviously you have the profit maps that you can do, but just what's some kind of homework, what's some desktop work that they can do to just to help them educate themselves so they can just move forward in their respective processes.
Yeah. So with TechVestor, we look at so many properties. And we had to, after looking at so many properties and underwriting so many properties, we started to realize that if the revenue wasn't 20% of the purchase price, it wasn't going to cash flow for us, or it wasn't going to hit our numbers. And so we refer to this as the 20% rule. Therefore, if a home costs $500,000, it needs to make $100,000 for it to work for TechVestor. Now, TechVestor has some additional fees that we have because we're a fund and we're scaling. Most people don't. And so usually the 15% rule will work for other people. It's a very simple term, price to rent ratio. It's been used forever, but we've just come to realize that instead of going and doing an underwriting on every single property across all these different markets, you could simply just use this 20% rule and be like, okay, if I can find a property that meets that 20% rule, then I would be able to most likely cash flow with this property. And I have analyzed so many markets. It's 277 markets since January alone. I just recently did a count and reviewed all these different markets to try to find places that could support the 20% rule and actually allow us to cash flow well in these locations and be able to buy multiple properties in these locations. Because there's a lot of little one-off places where you can get one property and hit 20%, but you can't get 10. So that's one little piece of criteria here. Now,
That's
with
great.
that
So
in mind,
let's pause you there for a moment. So I think that's great. So folks, where you're getting stuck, right? And people get stuck on this property is really pretty, or it's really far, or it's really close. I think these rule of thumbs are really important, especially in real estate where the inventory is so disparate. You need to have certain guidelines, like the 1% rule, for example, for rental properties, right?
Yeah.
For the folks that are long-term rental investors. So John's laid out a very good rule of thumb for if you're investing institutionally, that 20% rule. My banking, we actually flip it in banking. It's actually kind of like a 5 times rule. The way I think about it actually is like a 5 times rule. So if it's less than 5 times, then, that's something I like. If it's more, then not. But let's use your formulation. So if you can't if it's 100K of cash flow, you shouldn't pay more than 500,000. If you're like an institutional investor, but for us individuals,
gross revenue, not cash flow.
Of gross revenue, yeah. And that's another great. That's actually, thank you so much for bringing that up. But as an individual investor, there's a lot of costs and stuff that they don't apply if you're not a fund. So if you can find a property, for example, that does $150,000, you can pay up to $1 million, right? So if you want to go back to $500,000, then it needs to do at least $75,000 of gross revenue for you to pay $500,000. So gross revenue, again, these are where people really get mixed up and make really easy to avoidable mistakes. Gross revenue includes cleaning fees. It is not a pass-through. It's not like taxes or Airbnb fees. Like, you have to count it within your revenue. That's money that you're collecting, right? Yep. You are paying your cleaners, but you're collecting that. Include cleaning fees in your revenue numbers. $150,000. If you want to pay $500,000, it has to do at least $75,000. If not, move on and continue the work. John, go ahead.
And what I was going to say with the whole cleaning fee thing, I hate when people say, "Oh, cleaning is just a pass-through expense." No, it's not. It's actually a revenue stream most of the time. So most of the time, for my homes in Chicago, I used to put the cleaning fee around $250, and I would charge $100. I would pay my cleaners $125. And so then therefore I was making 50% of all of that money. If I counted it as a pass-through, I would have been underestimating by quite a bit. I wouldn't have been able to get the homes that I actually ended up getting. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not a pass-through. Know your market. Yeah, know your market. But to continue on this, the main thing, because I really want to get this across, where it's like, how do I stop analysis paralysis? And the first thing is understanding that the 20% rule, right? Generally, if it hits 15 to 20%, you're in a good position. Now, what I would challenge anybody out there to do is to try and find a home that meets the 20% rule, because that's not easy to do in the first place, right? I do it all day, every day. It's a very difficult thing to actually find. And so when you're sitting here and you're like, you can't make a decision and you're not sure if you should get the home or if you shouldn't get the home, and you're going back and forth, the reality is that if you just use this simple equation, eventually you'll start to realize that it's really difficult to find 20%. And then once you find a home that meets the 20% rule, you'll go, "Oh, I'm going to buy this home because very clearly it's going to do well for me." You're going to come across one that's, it's 25%. I should buy this home. Like, it becomes really clear that's the home I should buy, right? Because I've done this over and over again and they're all showing up as 15%. Now all of a sudden this home pops up and it's 25, and that's the home I should go for, right?
I love it.
That's exactly what we do with TechVestor. It's like, it hit our mark. Let's go for it because we know this is super rare. Right.
Yeah. And look, and thank you for pointing that out too. It's like people get frustrated. They do a little bit of work to a couple properties and they're like, there's nothing out there. Look, there's a lot of real estate out there. And you looked at 10 properties, like you, John, I looked 277 properties. Similarly, made 26 markets. Markets, right? And you multiply, say 10 properties per market, you're looking at almost 2,700 properties you looked at. So folks out there, and this is the point that I want to make, is if you only looked at a few, you haven't done enough work. And the problem is, if you're always going in a crazy detail on every single one, you're just burning yourself out, right? So you need these rules, the 20% rule, 15%, whatever your return hurdle is for you. And everyone's different. Everyone has a different philosophy and investment alternatives. But if it doesn't hit that, move on. Don't waste time. John doesn't waste time. If it's 13%, John's not doing his entire recipe on all those, right? So, okay, the too hard bucket and you move on. And then when you see the 23%, 25%, and then you're like, okay, now your mind is fresh, you're ready to go, and you're ready to attack it good with energy and vigor.
Yeah.
So I think that's like John, I think it's a great place to wrap up the conversation. But these actionable, it may seem simple to you, to folks that do it all the time, but for folks out there that this isn't their day job, that's incredibly helpful to know that there's these kind of rule of thumbs out there, that you have your masterclass on YouTube and you have a consulting firm that you're helping other investors do this. So my traditional closing question that I always ask my guests is, business is a team sport, and we wouldn't be here without others' help along the way. What's the kindest thing that someone's done for you to help you become a better investor today?
His name is Mike McKay, and he's from Jacksonville, Florida. And he was one of the first people that I helped with Airbnb data. And he literally referred so many people to me that it turned into a consulting firm, which now has helped like hundreds of people.
Wait, Mike McKay?
Mike McKay. Do you know him?
McKay is one of our that's funny that some people have said that McKay has helped us so much since we've known McKay since, I got to get him on the pod, actually. Thanks for reminding me.
You definitely
2016, we met Mike. Liz went to one of Mike's meetups here in New York City, and he was like the beginning of our Airbnb journey. That's really cool that you mentioned McKay. And we love Mike. I always meet up with Mike when he comes back to visit his sister here in New York, and we get coffee and catch up.
I helped his sister buy an A-frame.
Oh, you're the one that you founded the Upstate place.
She found it. I analyzed it. But yeah, that's the Upstate place. Yeah. And I helped her tell her like how to put, anyways. Yeah. So I'm that person. That's hilarious. McKay, he's the best. Is he not?
Dude, I love Mike. Mike has made me such a better investor, better operator, and one of the most generous people. I'm gonna immediately text him after we get off this.
Yeah.
Just one of the best people. Just like one of the really like good people in short-term rentals. He's helped so many people. That's awesome that you said you said McKay.
That's awesome that you knew him, because I've told him so many times too. I'm like, man, I owe this all to you. Cause like I had transitioned, right? Once I had sold the business, I'm like, what else should I maybe look into doing? And I got into renewable energy, and I quickly realized like, this isn't for me. But Mike had to just literally just kept sending people to me, being like, hey, this is the guy you got to talk to. This is the guy you got to talk to. And I started helping more and more people. And I noticed every single time I talked to these people and was helping them, I was just full of life. I was like full of energy. And I'm like, I got to get back to this. You know what I mean? This is what I do. Yeah, it's all Mike, just from pushing so many people to me.
Yeah, no, so shout out to Michael McKay. Yeah. He's one of the really good. Yeah, like we've known him since 2016.
That's awesome.
Consistently throughout. He's really one of the best people in short-term rentals. Although he's not in short-term rentals anymore.
No, he's not.
He's doing something else in Jacksonville on wholesaling. But I'm gonna get him on the show. He is a wealth of knowledge, and it's just great to. Yeah, it's cool.
Very cool.
This is short-term rentals, and we can end here. Like short-term rentals is a small space. It really is. Everyone knows each other. Yeah. So just encourage folks, join, contribute, be a positive influence, give back. It all comes back to you, and you're going to be a better investor, a better person. And like you said, like your life is just better. You're going to do something that you enjoy around people that you like being with. It just, money is money, right? But being able to do something that you enjoy, make money, and being around people that you like being around. Yes. Man, if you can do that, like you're going to live a long, happy life.
Yes, 100%. And I think there's a community in short-term rentals, right? So you can make money, you can do these different things, but then you get to like connect with so many other people that also can enjoy doing the exact same thing. And you're not competitors really, right? You're not stepping on each other's toes. And so you get to collaborate, you get to learn from each other and still both be able to thrive in it. And I think that's really one of the best things about it, right? Like just even being able to have these conversations with you, getting to meet with you, getting to pull out my laptop while we're eating just so I can help answer the questions that we were going through.
That's cool. I love it. I love it. And I think, like you're one of the good dudes in rentals, and I'm glad that we're able to make that connection. And folks out there, go to LinkedIn here. Folks, go to conferences. You'll find people that you vibe with. You'll find folks that you don't vibe with, but just you'll find your own tribe. It just makes the journey that much more enjoyable. John, thank you so much for spending time with me today, with my community. Really appreciate all your insights.
I appreciate you having me, Michael.